DT overcame early tax trouble and makeshift equipment to grow into one of the Pacific Northwest's largest grease trap disposal companies.
Started
Ooh.
with a 55-gallon drum and a rigid shop vac that I'd bought from Home Depot, and I'd drive around in my little Ford Ranger with 5 barrels in the truck.
Now, DT hopes to handle grease from Denver to Sacramento. Listen in. Welcome to the podcast. You started out specifically in grease out in the Pacific Northwest. Is that true?
That's correct. Grease traps only.
In 2011.
2011, yep.
What were you doing before 2011, and how did you land in the grease trap business?
So I had a small stormwater environmental business, and a company came up to us, asked if we could pump some grease traps for them. And I was like, man, I don't want grease traps. They stink. And
They do.
since I was the youngest partner in that stormwater business, I kind of got, you get to do the grease traps. And so I was like, all right, fine, whatever. And then I ended up falling in love with it. So stormwater was a lot of engineers, suit and tie, more type people. And then grease traps was chefs and restaurant owners. So I like to say drunk druggies, loose lip, everything about it is what I loved. And I could just walk into a restaurant and shoot the shit with the people like I'd known them for 20 years. So once you get used to the smell, it's pretty a sweet industry.
Well, so in the grease trap business, you guys have been doing this for a fairly long time by grease trap standards, because there's not a whole lot of companies that are just that strictly focused. Typically, they're tying in septic and other stuff. And I saw you guys did get added a little bit of diversity recently with plumbing, but specifically about the grease trap side, how did you figure out how the whole business worked? Because grease is a little bit trickier to get rid of. It also can have value. And I think they're a little more proactive along those lines out in Washington. So like when you're just starting out, you make it sound like it's super easy, but
not
you
easy at all.
You didn't know. How did you figure all that out?
I got in a lot of trouble with some state agencies, more so Department of Revenue. I didn't realize taxes were that big of a thing when I started my company. So I got in trouble with that, but I paid it all up, got everything good. And I was like, never going down that road again. But for disposal purposes back then, we had one disposal site. The closest one was about 2.5 hours north of us. So that's where I would transport every night to. And it started with a 55-gallon drum and a rigid shop vac that I'd bought from Home Depot. And I'd drive around in my little Ford Ranger with 5 barrels in the truck, pick them up, throw them into the back of the truck. So I was strictly interior grease traps. I didn't want any exteriors because, the septic guys could do that. All the other industries could do exteriors. So I wanted to be specialized in interior grease traps. My first truck I built with a 300-gallon propane tank just happened to be able to fit into any parking garage, just coincidentally. So then I became even more specialized, and I was the only one that could fit a full pump truck into a parking garage, any parking garage in Seattle and Bellevue. So I kind of took the lead on that aspect.
And you made that out of an old propane delivery truck?
No, the truck was an 86 F350. I called it the Red Dragon because it had such a bad head gasket that it smoked.
And you threw a 300-gallon propane tank on it, because I was going to say a 300-gallon propane tank is tiny.
Yep, 300-gallon propane tank on the bed of the truck. And then I found a pump. Actually, where I got the propane tank from was a pump sitting on a 50s. I don't even know what kind of truck it was. So it's a Massport pump from 1934 or 35. Aircraft grade aluminum. It's a sweet pump. I still have it to this day. And so that's how I started it. Just kind of building things as I go.
Pump from the 30s, a propane tank mounted on an F350, and the propane tank probably puts you overweight because they're heavy to begin with, because they're made with a much thicker gauge steel than like a typical tank. You're probably barely legal. And you're running around. Are you dependable? Like, meaning, can you depend on your equipment? Not you as a person, but is the equipment something where you're just fighting from day one?
It was, yeah. But when you have no money, you got to do what you have to do. So I got pretty creative. I would say until that truck finally blew up from running out of oil, it was fun. I mean, I would do nighttime runs. So when I started, I would start at about 8 o'clock at night and then work through all the night just so I could get away from the I-5 traffic in Seattle. I could get more counts done then. But
You
yeah, I
said
would
you were
say,
broke. How long did it take you before you weren't broke? Is this years, or does it
yeah,
happen pretty quickly because you were so specialized and nobody else wanted to do it?
no. So I had like a 450 credit score when I started the company. So I couldn't get a loan to save my life. So everything I did, it was just, and that's where I got in trouble with the Department of Revenue. Is I was taking all the money I was collecting from sales taxes and throwing it back into the company to try to just get fuel. Like if my wife and I wanted dinner out, we would go. She would jump in the pump truck with me, and we'd go out, and I would do a work trade that night so we could get dinner. So it's kind of a fun thing. I mean, hell, I even ratchet strapped my son in his car seat when he was about a year old. There was like a big back seat area, but it didn't have seats in it. So I just ratchet strapped his car seat base down, and we'd go out on a date night. And then, yeah, it was kind of fun.
I can feel your pain on small business taxes, especially when you're trying to get going. I have a little LLC that I do outside of this company, and all the money that the company brings in, I need to put back into the company.
Yeah.
Yet you're still on the hook for its pass-through income when you're an LLC. So you're still on the hook for like 40% of it at the end of the year. So
Right.
you just kiss that goodbye. And
Exactly.
that's one of the things that I think that's the hardest thing that I've had to experience as somebody who started his own business, is not necessarily that you have to pay the taxes, is just that you need that money to let the business grow. I wish there was smarter tax laws that way. Sounds
Yeah.
like you kind of ran into the same thing, a little bit different, but same concept.
Yeah. And then going back to when I finally started getting paid. So it was about 2015, late 15 is when I finally got my first real paycheck.
So you
it
were
took
doing this for
about
3 or 4 years before it started to finally make some money.
Yeah, and it was barely any money, but yeah, finally.
Did you move into those larger outdoor grease traps, or 4 years down the road, are you still that guy going inside?
Yeah, so we kind of had to. So when I had that 300-gallon tank Pizza Hut chain up here, it was about 45 locations back then. They gave me an opportunity, which was eye-opening for me. It was really, this is not the life I want to live, is corporate restaurant chains. They just want nickel and dime you. So that almost bankrupted me my second year in. But
So
I
that
was
was a
doing
negative experience. I thought you were going
Yeah,
to
it was
paint the
very
positive
negative.
experience here.
So I had that 300-gallon truck, and it's hard if we could pull up a map of the state, but Centralia is about an hour south of my office now, and then Bellingham is about 3 hours north of me. So that was my range for just Pizza Hut. And I had one dump site that I could do, well, maybe two. There was one up north that was about an hour and it was a 4,000-gallon exterior grease trap that I was doing with a 300-gallon truck. So that was an all-night run. I would pump 300 gallons, haul ass down to the dump, turn and burn. That one sucked for 18 cents a gallon back then. So there was no money
no wonder
in
you're
that.
losing money. I mean, just
Yeah.
time and fuel. You're
And
running
then
2 hours to dump. How did you determine your pricing? Did you come in thinking, well, I'm just going to undercut everybody, or did you figure out quickly that there needs to be a better pricing strategy?
So yeah, a little bit of undercut. I had the Baker and the Darlings that I was competing against back then. So I knew what they were roughly charging. So I wanted to be about $10 or a couple cents cheaper than them. And then the one thing that I could do that they couldn't was community or customer service. So they lack on that aspect where I could really shine on the customer service. And that's kind of what helped us grow. And then it goes off to say, value yourself to what you're valued for. So I realized real fast that I'm a better service provider than my competitors. So I started raising my rates up in the mid-teens, and now I'm actually more expensive than everybody else as a premier. We like to justify ourselves as a premier grease trap service. So we do a little bit more than anybody else does around us.
So let's go back to 2015. This is when you finally get to start paying yourself. Are you still just a one-man show, or what does the company look like back in 2015?
So about late 13, early 14, I bought my first 3,500-gallon pump truck. There was a company down in Oregon that it was dead. It was a 1972 white Freightliner cab over with a 3,500 gallon tank on it. The guy's like, "Oh yeah, the truck's dead. You can just buy it for the scrap steel price." So I think it was like $3,000. We had it hauled up here, and my buddy that was a diesel mechanic was playing with it. We threw batteries in it, and it had a exhaust fire extinguisher flap thing. So if the engine caught on fire, this flap would go down and it would suffocate the fire out. Flip that up, the engine started, and I was able to use that truck for about a year. Came with a vacuum pump and everything. So when that truck finally died, I bought a concrete mixer, scrapped everything off of that to pay for the build, because back then scrap prices were pretty good for steel. So took the tank and the pump, put it on a 89 Kenworth T800 chassis, and ran that for a few years. So I had one Class B driver hauling the 3,500 gallon tanker, and then I would run nighttime doing interiors. And then about late, I think it's 2016 is when I hired my first interior grease trap guy to help alleviate some of the workload off of my back.
How are you finding people to do this type of work? Do you need what kind of licensing do they require in Washington, or isn't there any?
So we're unregulated right now for grease traps in Washington. So it's just if you got the CDL trucks, you're Class B to Class A, and then just anybody that wants to work.
Because grease isn't considered hazmat in any way either, correct?
Correct. It's non-regulated.
Right. Well, that makes it a little bit easier, at least, to find help. So now let's fast forward into like the late 2000 teens or early 2020s. How quickly does the growth cycle go upward after you start figuring things out? Does it still take years before you're...
I think we really had about a 30 to 40% growth rate every year over year. 2020 was our biggest jump and our biggest loss. You know how that goes. The beginning of the year, everything fell apart. And then Darling shut off grease trap services in the Northwest at the end of 2020 and started to partner with us. So we took on about 200 accounts the last quarter of 2020, which gave us a big boost for customer counts.
Well, and COVID had to basically shut you guys down because they shut down all the restaurants.
For the most part. So it was about a month or so when the restaurants were real slow, but then DoorDash, Uber Eats started really jamming up here. And I mean, I had one guy driving 8 hours for 3 stops, each day, just trying to keep him somewhat employed, keep, everybody else that I had, because I was really scared if I lost everybody, trying to get people back in after COVID, because we all didn't know what was going to happen. So, but that was, that really made me realize all my eggs are in one basket. I thought I was diversified, but I was still only diversified in the restaurant industry. So I had a 70% mom and pop, probably about 10% chain restaurants, and then another 10 to 20 in like hospice, nursing, hospitals, government contracts.
So when you talk about diversification, is that when the light went on that I need to diversify the grease traps I'm pumping, or is that when you start getting into like you do drain line cleaning?
Plumbing, yeah. Now? So that's when I started to open up other things, because I was on the septic pages on Facebook, and I could see all these guys just killing it with the wet wipes stuff that came out really in COVID. And they're out there crushing it with that. So I was like, all right, well, I'm not getting into septic, because in Washington you're not supposed to mix the two. So I was like, I don't want to do that. And then I was like, well, let's do plumbing, because plumbing's never going anywhere. Everybody's always going to have plumbing. So I got into plumbing. I started subcontracting out to a small plumbing outfit underneath my name, and that backfired like they usually do. So then I finally hired my own in-house plumber, and then they changed the laws too. So it became this whole thing. Right when I started a plumbing business, commercial went from 4,000 plumbing hours to 8,000 plumbing hours. So then it was like, my plumbing list shrunk, because by the time a plumber's at 8,000 hours, they're pretty seasoned into the company they're working for.
Or they're going to do their own thing.
Yeah. So it was kind of a chore to find somebody. So we're doing that now, and full installs, drain cleaning, everything.
Well, the drain cleaning is a little less regulated. Well, I shouldn't say a lot less regulated than plumbing, at least around where we are. I can't imagine it's different in Washington. So that's where there's no barrier to entry. And I would think that's a natural fit for you guys in the grease traps already. Because typically if you're neglecting your grease trap, you're neglecting the pipes. So that should have been easy work that you were probably giving away prior.
Yeah. So the drain cleaning was the first thing we really took on, just because we could clean the grease trap, jet the line, and then suck out all the waste at the same time. So, where a plumber has to just let it dump back into the grease trap, and then the customer has to call us to pump the grease trap back out. So we were kind of trying to be that one-stop shop. One of our sales guys likes to use the Fred Meyer analogy. I don't know if you have Fred Meyer's where you're at. They're a Northwest business. So they have apparel, home and garden, all your grocery needs, fuel station, everything. So it's a one-stop shop. So that's what we kind of really focused on, was becoming a one-stop shop for your restaurant. And then that's when I had my hands tied for a few years in the UCO industry. So I was not supposed to do it. I would burn bridges if I got into UCO. So I waited and waited until last year when I said, you know what, we're changing the name from West Coast Grease Traps to West Coast Renewables. And so then we turned on UCO last year as our new line item. So
UCO,
now we're doing used cooking oil.
That's not a term I'm familiar with. You're educating me. So you've got you're diversified now. What have you got for employees right now?
So we're at about 24 full-time employees and one part-time guy on the weekends.
And that's all grease, plumbing, and drain cleaning.
Yep. One full-time plumber, one apprentice plumber, and then everybody else is pumpers and office staff.
How are you managing all that? Is that just something that it's kind of self-managed because you've grown fairly strategically, or is this sometimes, challenging?
It was challenging. I have the best staff I've ever had in the 14 years we've been around. So my crew is extremely strong and really, really good. I couldn't be happier with what I have right now.
Is that something where you've got to take care of them to make sure that that's the way that works? Because you've already said that you like to pride yourself on customer service more than your competitors.
Yeah. So they get paid pretty well. Most of the guys are in overtime every week. So, they love that. Weekends are always double time if you work Monday through Friday. So there's always an opportunity for them to make even more money on the weekends. We do 11 paid days off every year for everybody, not including their week vacation. So you get New Year's Day off, or however it's going to fall on the calendar. 4th of July or the 5th of July off, depending on how that falls. Labor Day, right. Memorial Day, Thanksgiving, and Black Friday are both paid off. So I'm real family oriented when it comes to it. I want my guys and office staff girls to be really able to enjoy their holidays with their family. And then we shut down for about 4 or 5 days for Christmas. And then you get your birthday paid off.
Seems like your company culture might be a good one too, just basing that off of the way we're doing this podcast right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I can get a pretty good sense that.
Yeah, we got a really good culture right now. I mean, there's been hurdles in the past, but right now the culture is really, really strong.
Well, let's talk about those hurdles. I mean, you've talked about everything from tax problems to, old equipment. When you think back over the last almost 20 years you've been doing this, 15 years you've been doing this. Like, what was the biggest hurdle? What was the biggest obstacle when you think back?
Probably finding people to represent me the way I wanted to be represented. That's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to overcome. Because nobody can be me. That's something I had to really, when I started this, I never wanted it to be an owner operator. I didn't want to be out in a pump truck till I'm 60 pumping grease traps. So I really wanted to figure out how to build a company, but allow my employees to be free enough to express how they want to express themselves, but yet still represent me on how I expect. So, yeah, I mean, in 16, my first full-time employee was probably my best decision. He was an older guy. He was a bar manager for the longest time. And so he could, how barkeepers are. I mean, they could just walk in. So it was really nice having him come in and just be able to really build a continued relationship with the customer. And that was something great for me. And then Matt, He's now my operations manager. He started for me in 17 um, as a pump truck driver. He got promoted to dispatcher, and now he's operations manager. So, and he was a hell of a pumper back then too. So it was really great seeing these guys grow. But yeah, I would say probably just that aspect of representing me the best is the hardest struggle.
Yeah, I can feel your pain on that. And sometimes it's hard to realize that not everyone can be you, whether it's work ethic or personality or whatever. And sometimes it's really hard to just let someone be themselves as long as they're still representing you properly. And I think that's kind of what you're trying to say there.
I guess the other hurdles would be financing. That was tough because like I said, I started with a 420 credit score, 450, and it took me a while to build my credit up. And I think it was 2018. I applied for a credit card, got it. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Kept applying. And next thing you know, I got about 11 or 12 credit cards, flew down to Florida to National Truck Center, threw 11 credit cards down on the table and bought my first pump truck, like real done pump truck by a company. And yeah, that was a wild experience. So that was funny.
What do you guys do for marketing? Is it typically mostly word of mouth, or because you're in first of all, you have a huge service area, which I think that has to be complex in itself, but are you relying on Google? Are you doing what are you doing for marketing?
In the beginning, it was word of mouth and just door to door. So prior to COVID, we would probably hit 50 to 80 restaurants a day and just walk in, get told to piss off almost out of every restaurant. And then one or two would stick. And then the customer would call back about, a couple months later saying, oh, I need you guys now. Regulations have helped us a lot over the last 12 years, probably. So they were starting in early teens, probably about 2011 to 13 is when all the regulations started really coming in full force over here. But yeah, it was hard to try to market this business. It was how do we? Because we got to find the restaurant tours, the chefs. So building the relationships with the chef was probably the biggest marketing thing we could do, because chefs will move restaurant to restaurant throughout their careers. And if you're a good grease trap provider, a lot of them will take you with them just because they don't have to worry about the grease trap overflowing. One less thing the chef has to deal with. So if the chef's actually running the kitchen, that's one of the best things we could do. And then the restaurant, I did a program where it was neighborhood special. So like even Seattle's broken up into multiple neighborhoods. So one neighborhood, Ballard, we would say, all right, if you help me get your neighbors, I'll do your grease trap for free for X amount of months, or for how many grease traps you get me. So that would help build us around that neighborhood, because I wanted to be dense in every area.
The referral program, basically.
Yeah, referral program was probably the best thing. And then I'd say late teens is when I built my website and got on Google. So I wasn't even on. Yeah, I don't know if I had an online presence till the late teens. So it was
and
mostly
now
word
is
of
that
mouth.
probably your number one source, or are you still word of mouth referral?
Word of mouth. But yeah, I would say word of mouth is still our best. We got a pretty good presence on social media now. We've got all the social media platforms and YouTube that we started this year. So I think that's really helping us expand into analytics on Google. So yeah, I think SEO now is helping, but it's still a tough industry. And then the
So
cities
whose vision
have.
was that to get all this going? Is that something that you decided, hey, we should do this, or did you hire somebody?
Oh yeah, I hired a content creator. Tyler, he's there's this shit I can't do. I don't have the patience for this.
Or want to do?
Or want to do, yeah, or time. So, but I got a slight complex where I see something I like and I have an issue with finding companies that can do a decent job at it. So I just say, screw it, I'll do it myself. That's why I started a plumbing business. Is every restaurant would get a new grease trap put in interior, and they're stamped on these new plastic or polypropylene ones, inlet, outlet, and the plumbers would still put the things in backwards. And I'm like, okay, well, this has got to get resolved. So that's partly why I started the business, is because I was getting sick of it's as simple as looking and using your head. And it was so fighting with that was kind of crazy. So that's why we ended up doing the plumbing for the most part. But yeah, so like I can't find good embroidery companies. So I ended up buying my own embroidery machine. Same with graphics. It's so expensive to graphic our trucks, put the wraps on and everything. I bought
Right.
Tyler's starting to do that. Not that he's probably happy to do it, but so we're doing all of our own wraps now and graphics on our trucks because, to save money and just trying to find somebody good to do it is tough.
Where do you see this business like 10 years from now?
Well, that's part of my complex. So when I started in 2011, I did West Coast instead of Northwest because I had thought within 5 years I could be in the entire West Coast. Um, Come to find out that's extremely challenging. So, but right now we turned on Oregon and Idaho and back onto Eastern Washington. So now our region is pretty big. So we're going to be taking on the entire Northwest by the end of this year, and then probably dive down into California, maybe to the Bay Area, but Sacramento for sure.
Doesn't
And
that
then,
require you to have more, like, you're not driving out of a central location? Are you creating hubs where you're keeping trucks
well,
and
yeah, we're gonna.
employees?
So like right now, everything's based out of our Sumner location. So our east. So we just signed up the Safeways grocery store chain. So we're driving all the way to Eastern Washington to get that done, and that's a pretty good drive. That's a day and a half route because we got to deal with regulations for DOT. But once we start picking up towards Spokane and Post Falls, Idaho, we'll probably look at getting a storage yard over there. We got a couple early teen 4,000-gallon pump trucks that we'll probably just park over there that are all paid off, so we don't have to deal with that. And then we
Run
got,
them back and forth.
yeah, we have like a little Ford Focus that we can use as our shuttle car to get the guys there and back.
You just said something interesting. You picked up the Safeway contract, and earlier you talked about how Pizza Hut almost did you in.
Yep.
What did you learn from the Pizza Hut misstep to be able to sign these bigger contracts now?
Don't let them push me around. That was the hardest thing. So the corporate guys want to get the best price, and they're going off a national price structure. So the Northwest right now is the most expensive in the country just because, well, we're traveling 9 hours round trip to dump our grease. So we have to offset that cost by raising our prices to be, affordable to be able to dump. So we found out that with our customer service and our ability to actually clean grease traps properly and reliably, these companies, they might not like our price in the beginning, but they get so fed up with the other guys not showing up or not doing a good job. The fog inspectors, fats, oils, and grease inspectors, citing them for not getting grease traps in compliance. So they usually will always come right back to us. And then we have the upper hand to negotiate our pricing where we feel comfortable at. Clearly a large corporation is going to get a better price than a mom and pop just because of the volume game. But yeah, so Pizza Hut back then told me what price I was going to be at. And I said, sure. And that's how I really learned I screwed up. So, and that's value yourself, don't undercut yourself just trying to get a sale because, well, that one almost crippled me. And if I wouldn't have said, you know what, enough's enough with Pizza Hut and walked away, I probably wouldn't be here because of that account. So like we signed up all the Wendy's locations and everything. And that was a big negotiation back and forth for that one. It took a few months to get that signed. And now we've had them for 5-6 years and, we're both happy.
And that would help when you try to move down, into the southern,
Yep.
Because you've already got these established relationships then with chains. I would think that would be helpful. Are you
And
building
that's
this
where
business?
diversifying is key for us. So after Pizza Hut, I didn't want any chains. So I wanted mom and pops only because I could relate with them better. And then they didn't survive COVID as well as the chains did. So that's when I was like, shoot, I really need to go back to the chains, the hospice community, because that's not going anywhere during an epidemic. So that's when we really started turning our focus, not away from the mom and pops, because I don't ever want to lose that. I always try to treat a mom and pop as I would a 100 chain location. Everybody's equal across the board. Nobody gets priority. Even our Amazon account, they don't get priority over anybody. And they're one of our largest accounts. So
We talked about like where you see this business and down the road. Are you building a business for acquisition or succession, or what's your plan there?
Succession. I wanted to build a legacy. I don't have any intentions on selling. I want to build this. I will build this into the largest grease trap UCO company west of the Rockies. So that's about as far east as I want to go as Denver, and then everything from there to here.
Learn more about DT and West Coast Renewables at wcrenewables.com. Please be sure to like and subscribe to keep more of this great content coming.